Hello all my JavaScript friends, this is the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and this is Fun with JavaScript, our cache defense game. So we've completed the game testing, and so now we basically want to take a look at the board, the cache, the road, the arsenal, and the monster. And we'll take these on one at a time per each video. So we're going to first start here with the board. So basically, again, as this is TDD, we got to ask ourselves, what is it that we want the board controller to do? And then we write our test to be able to express to the board controller what it does. Then we write the code within the board controller to figure out what the heck needs to happen. So before I begin, just want to call your attention that in the upper right-hand corner, you can get all of our code at gitlab.com. What is that? Let me make sure I got that right. Yeah, GitHub. I'm sorry, my work is GitLab. GitHub.com/thevirtuoid/FWJS-cache-defense. Everything that we have here, including what I'm currently working on, is in there. It's MIT license, free to use, free to do anything you want with it. The main branch has absolutely everything on it. You can also email me at thevirtuoid@gmail.com, and you can get all of our Fun with JavaScript projects at https://funwithjavascript.com. So now that that's out of the way, let's take a look at the board controller and what are some of the things that we want the board controller to do. So first of all, before we do anything else, let's create ourselves a new board controller test script. And that's just going to be very simple, BoardController.cy.js. Okay, and now that we've created our BoardController.cy.js, let's actually edit it out and let's take a look at it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to put on what we call a describe. So let's zoom into our screen there, and this is basically a describe, and I'm not going to go through what describes and its and expects and all that are for right now. I'll just give you a very brief overview. As describe allows us to be able to group tests together. And so this test is just going, everything's going to be put within the board controller test. So we need to think about now, what are the particular things we want this controller to do? Well, some of the things are relatively simple. First of all, we need to make sure it actually creates a board. So let's pop a creation description on there, a grouping for creating the board. And there we have it. This is going to be the creation. So all of our tests for creating the board will be contained here. What are some of the things we also want to do? Well, we need to create a completely new board or new board within the board itself. So basically initialization of the board. So let's go ahead and do that. And that will include a field within the board. And that field will basically allow us to, is where eventually everything is going to get thrown into. So let's pop that description in. And there we go. So that describes us our new board. What are some of the other things we're going to need to do? Well, one of the big things we're going to need to be able to do is we're going to need to be able to insert items into the board. So let's go ahead and write that describe. And there we are. We've now written that describe. And next thing we're going to want to figure out how to do is we got an insert item. We need to be able to some sort of retrieve the item. So some sort of getItem method would be a very good thing to have. So let's do a getItem method. And there it is. What else we need to do? So we got to insert item, we can move the get item. We're going to have to remove items because when monsters get eliminated, they're going to have to be removed from the field or from the board. So we need some sort of way to be able to remove an item. And there we are. This is where all our tests for removing an item will come from. So let's take these things one at a time. First of all, creation. So basically there's a couple things we want to do here is we want to be able to actually create an object. So let's throw the code in there. There it is. So it should create the object. It basically says, hey, we should be able to create a board controller. So what does this mean now? Well, basically what we want to do is once we press Control S here and save it, we need to be able to run our test. So let's get our test all set up. When we go to the command prompt, let's type in npx Cypress open, and that will open up our interactive Cypress testing suite. And we'll let it do its thing, and it will eventually come up to a screen. And there we have it. So we're going to click on E2E testing to get it to start testing. It's going to choose the browser. We want to choose start testing in Chrome. I don't want Electron. I don't want Electron. I want Chrome. So we're going to start testing in code. Let's go and throw to another screen, and then let's bring up that other screen. There's our screen, and so there's our board controller test and our original game test. So we're going to click on board controller. Let's go and run the test, and it's going to say, hey, board controller is not defined. As you can tell there, board controller is not defined. So let's go and now define our board controller. So let's go back into our WebStorm. And we need to now go, let's go into the directory. Let's take a look at the directory. And within our directory, underneath our classes subdirectory, we're going to create a new JavaScript file. Actually, whoops, we're not going to create it there. We're going to create, first of all, a new directory called controllers, because we're going to put all our controllers into one directory. So now we're going to create a file called BoardController. We're going to export default class BoardController. And we're going to save that. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to switch the screen over. That's what I did. I'd forgotten to switch the screen over. So now we got the board controller all set up and ready to go. If we go back to our test screen and then hit reload, rerun all the test, it still says board controller is not defined. Why does it say board controller is not defined? Well, because we forgot, if we go back into our code here, we forgot to import it. Now we've got it created. So let's import that. So now, as you can tell here, we've got the import ready to go. So let's save that. We should now be able to go to our test screen. And yep, let's zoom it in real quick. Yeah, there we go. So there it is, expected true to be true. So we got it. That did it. Okay, so that completed our first test. No big deal. And that's really all we need to test for at this particular point in time. So what about the new board? Let's go ahead and take a look at the code that we want the new board to do. So basically we want it to be able just to be very simple. We just want to be able to create the board. And once it creates the board, we need then to be able to figure out whether that board has been created or not. And if we know it's been created or not, we're going to have some sort of field variable on there. So let's just throw that code in there. And it's very simple. What we're going to do here is we're going to call a newBoard method. And that newBoard method is going to change the state of our board controller. And what state are we taking a look at? We're going to be taking a look at the field. And we're doing the same thing here we did with the game, is that we don't know exactly what the field's going to look like yet. That will change later on. So all we need to find out now is whether the field has been created or not. So this is going to expect board control. This is going to call a newBoard method and expect the field to be true. Well, if the field to be true, it has to probably start off to be false or something else like that. So now let's actually create something else. We need to go back to our creation section up here. And within the creation section, we need to put another test to make sure that our variables have been initialized, specifically the field. So let's pop that in there. And so now we're taking a look at, we got a new test up here that says should initialize the variables and that field should be null. And if field is not, once field gets initialized at the new board, it should be true. So those are our tests. So let's save that. Let's go back to our test. And we got errors. And what are the errors that we got? Well, basically it's a bunch of them because we haven't done anything with field. You know, expected undefined to be null because field does not exist yet. And again, this is the whole part of TDD. You write your test, watch it fail, write the code to make it not fail, and then everything is hunky-dory. Then you refactor it to that, but we're getting refactored a little bit later on. So let's get back to our code. And it says we've got to create a new board method and a field. So let's go over to our board controller and let's throw that code in there. Okay, and now the field is now set in there. First ones we got the new board, which is what we were originally testing for. And again, I don't know what the new board, the field is going to look like. So I'm just saying, hey, to create a field. Eventually, once we start getting into the graphics part of this, of the sections here, which is after all these controllers are built, then at that point we'll probably have to go back to some of these tests and modify the test to where they actually have real values. But for right now, I don't know what that is. But I've made field a private variable. I'm initializing it to null, which should satisfy the, let's go back to board controller. That should satisfy that expectation there. And since it's a private field, I've got to be able to get outside access to it. So by using a getter function here, I'm making it read only. And then, of course, obviously, I'm setting field within newBoard. So let's save that. We've saved BoardController. That should have run our test. Let's take a look at our test. Yep, working like a champ. So now that we got that done, all right, now let's go insert an item. So let's flip back to our code. And let's change the code for insertion of the item, which we'll scroll down to bring that up. Yep, there we go. And insert an item. So let's pop some code in there. Okay, so what are the things we want to do for inserting an item? Well, basically, we won't be able to throw an error if the item is not a base game item, because the field's going to get all the different items, whether it's a monster or a cache or a weapon or something like that. So all we're going to do is just check, make sure it's not a base game item. Now when we insert it, we probably want to insert it at a particular position too. So we want to make sure that if the position part of the argument is not an item position. And if we were also throw an error if it's a duplicate ID, and finally you should be able to insert an item on the field. So let's take a look at these codes one at a time. So here we go with the base game item. You know, we're going to throw the errors, no big deal. And here's the item position. We're going to throw the errors there, no big deal. And it should throw an error if we have a duplicate ID. And finally, we should insert an item in the field. So that's the unit test for the insert item. But there's two very interesting things here, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, is that we have the base game item and item position. And these are going to be two classes now that basically we're going to have to create. And since we're creating classes, we're going to have to create unit tests for them. So if we save what we have here and we go to our test and zoom, you can tell obviously we've got errors out the wazoo, of course, because half this stuff is completely missing. So we now have to if we want to try to get everything working here, we now have to worry about the base game item and the item position. So let's go ahead and throw those on there. So what I'm actually going to do with this is, let me get back over to the code. What I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take the base game item, as you can see there, and I'm going to take the item position and I'm just going to flat out create the unit test and the classes for those basically so we can go ahead and have those ready to go. Now the idea here is that we will eventually get to the base game item positions in more detail, but for right now this will be just enough again to be able to get everything working. So to do that, let's work with the base game item first. Let's go over to the directory and we're going to go to the E2E and we're going to click on new, go to JavaScript file, and we're going to call it base game item. Of course we're going to call it base game item. .cy. Cool. All right, so let me go over to the code. There's our code. And let me go ahead and pop some code in there for you. And again, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to very quickly I'm not going to go into great details on the base game item. So basically, we should be able to return an object, set all the defaults, make sure that the ID is set, and throw an exception if the position. So what we're saying here is that when we do create the base game item, we can create an ID and we can create a position, but there will be defaults for both the ID and the position. So that we now have that saved. If we go over to our Cypress test screen, this is the main screen itself, we can see now that we have a base game item in the left-hand corner. So if we run base game item, it kind of blows up, and it blows up because it can't find the modules yet, which is no problem. So now we go back to our directory, and underneath classes, we're going to create a new JavaScript file called base game item. And let's throw the code inside there for base game item. And it's very easy here. We got the base game item, which basically says I now have, let's actually put the code up there. There we go. We have the base game item that says that we have an ID and a position, that both of them do have defaults. And this, by the way, this UUID4 is a library that we had to install called UUID, which gives me a universally unique identifier. We're going to throw an error if if there is no position, and then save that position. We're going to get the IDs, get the positions. Let's go to the bottom of the screen here, and then we're going to also set the position, which is one of the commands we're going to need. So let's now go over to ItemPosition, and we'll create a new JavaScript file, new test file called ItemPosition. And then let's throw the code into there. Let's go, let me bring it up first. ItemPosition. So what does ItemPosition do? ItemPosition gives us an X and a Y. So as you can tell here, you know, we should be able to create the object, set the defaults, which are defaults for X and Y. And we're going to throw an error if the X is not a number, throw an error if Y is not a number, and it should set X and Y for us automatically. And let me go to the bottom there. Yep, as you can tell, that's all there is to that one. So let's now go into our classes and let's create a JavaScript file called ItemPosition. Let's throw our code inside there, and let's put it up on the screen so we can all see it. And there it is. So again, we just have X and Y's. That's all it really is. And we just do the X and Y's, and we're going to throw errors if the X and Y's are incorrect. So now if we go back to our Cypress test screen, you now notice that we have the base game item, which now passes all of the test. As you can tell there, it passes all of the test. Now we also have ItemPosition. So if we go to ItemPosition, it runs and passes all of its tests. So now that allows us to go back now to the BoardController. And we still got a couple of errors, but that's fine because we haven't really worked with it that much. We've just made sure that we had the base game item and make sure we had base game item all set up, and we had the item positions all set up. So now that that is all set up, let's flip back over to our BoardController. I'm going to clear some screens off here so I can see what the heck I'm doing. So let's go to our BoardController. Let's make sure we got everything imported. We're going to import the base game item, and we're going to import the item position. Oops, try that again. I can't type. Alrighty. So as you can tell now, we're now imported the base game item and the item position. That should make things run just a little bit easier, although we still are missing some things. Let's just check to make sure. Yeah, we're still got errors on there. Pretty much the exact same errors. And of course, the whole reason we got the exact same errors there is because now we're able to finally define insert item. Now that we've got our base base game item fixed up and our item position fixed up, we can now do our insert item inside of our BoardController. As you can tell there, it doesn't have it in there. So let's pop some code in there. Okay, under the Metric Television, it's in there. First of all, here is the insert item. Let's bring it up on the screen. Basically, I forgot to import the base game item. So let's import the base game item. Let's import the base game item. There we go. So that now allows us to import the base game item and import the item position. So we're now basically checking to make sure that the item is correct, that the position is correct, and once those are correct, we will also want to make sure we don't have duplicate IDs. So here's where we're throwing the errors. These errors have been defined at the very top here as my static errors. Plus I now have an items section here that is now a mapping to which all I have to do is that once I do the insert item, I set that item into the mapping. So let's save this and let's go back to our code and let's do a refresh. See what happens. Aha, we still have an error. And the error says, should insert an item in the field, BoardController getItem is not a function. Aha! So that looks like that basically what we did here is inside of our test, we had a option there. Where is it? I can't find it. There it is. Okay. I also had something called getItem, which allowed me to get an item. So we're missing the getItem method inside the BoardController. So let's flip over to the BoardController and let's add that getItem in. Although in actuality, I think what I really want to do here is let's go ahead inside the board controller. Let's go ahead and add the get, we need the get item. Let's go ahead and add the test for get item first so we can kill two birds here with one stone. So let's go back over there. There's our get item. Let's throw some code in there for get item. And there's actually, let's bring it all up to the bottom. Okay, and there's our get item. And the get item is basically very easy. We're going to create a new board. This is before each of the tests. So we're going to create a new board, insert that item. And so basically we're just going to do a couple of simple tests here. We're going to make sure that the error argument is, we'll throw an error if the argument is not defined. We're going to return null if the item cannot be found, and we will return the item if the item can be found. So we do have one definition here, error get item undefined ID. So let's throw that code in. So that's basically, that should get the get item there. So we'll need to put the get item and the get error code within our board controller. So let's throw that code inside there. And through the magic of television, we have it in there. First of all, we've got our error message, error get item undefined ID as defined. And now we also have the get item defined, which is real simple. We throw an error if it's not defined. Otherwise, we return items, get ID, or null. Now, why did I do this? Because I wanted to return null if the value, we could not find the item. But within the JavaScript mapping, if it can't find an item with the get, it returns undefined and not null. I've never liked that. That's just me personally. Other people probably, yell at me for that, but hey, that's my game. We're going to do it that way. So basically I'm saying, hey, obviously if you don't find anything, then return null instead. Or if you find something, don't worry about it. So that should complete that. So let's just go ahead and save everything off, and then let's flip over to our test screen. And it looks like everything is done, and it is. Get item is now done. Looking like a champ. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is we want to be able to, let's go over to our code again. And the final thing here is we're going to want to be able to remove an item. So let's throw the code in there for removing an item. Actually, let's show it on the screen. There we go. Last thing we want to do is be able to remove an item. So let's throw some code inside there for removing an item. Alrighty, and through the magic of television, we have it there. So our first section here is we're just sitting here and getting everything all set up by doing a new board and by inserting an item. So the argument I want to have for remove item is I want to be able to pass the item itself. So what we're going to do here in remove item is first thing we're going to check to make sure there is no base game item, or that the argument is indeed a base game item. And then we're going to basically return false if the item cannot be found, and return true if the item is found. And there's a reason I'm returning false and returning true, which I'll get to here in just a second. But that's all we're really going to do for this particular controller. So we've saved it off. We scroll over and, oh, by golly gee, look at that. It errored out again. Oh, how horrible, how horrible. Yeah. Anyway, well, that's kind of what we expected to happen. So let's flip back over to our code, and let's go over to our board controller, and let's go ahead and insert some code. And through the magic of television, there it is. So basically, if the item is not a base game item, then we're going to throw an error. Otherwise, we're going to return the delete function from the map. And the delete function from the map will return false if it cannot find the item, and will return true if it does find the item. So that's why in our board controller, we are returning false, or we're expecting false, or we're expecting true, depending upon whether we find it or not. So we're just using basically what is available within JavaScript. So let's save that off. Let's zoom to our screen, and yep, there we go. 13 passing, no failing. So everything now is completely failing. And the way I got my screen set up here, I can't scroll down a little further to be able to show you the remove item declarations, but that's just the way it is. Let's see if I can squeeze that down. Yeah, actually, let me do this. Let's see if I can do that. That won't let me do it. Okay, hey, we tried something. Didn't work this time. That's just the way it goes. Okay, so that pretty much now completes our board controller. Everything we wanted to get done. Let's flip back to our code. Everything we wanted to get done here, which was we wanted to test for the creation, we wanted to test for the new board, we wanted to be able to insert an item, We want to be able to get an item and remove an item. These are the behaviors we want our particular board controller to do, and this should be fine for what we've got. That works great. Oh, one thing I want to do before we finish that off there is that we've made changes now. Let's make sure that the other tests are still working. So let's go back to our main screen here. We're going to click on BaseGameItem. All right, it still works great. Board controller we know works. That works great. Yeah, here you can see it's a little smaller obviously, but here you can see where it's doing the remove item. Let's make sure game is still working. Yep, game is still working. Let's make sure item position is still working. Yep, item position is still working too. So that's it. So now we've got a board controller that, or a controller that controls everything there is about the board, at least everything that we know will happen at this point. We will revisit this later on when we start designing the actual graphics to it and when we start getting it integrated within the web. That's going to be after we finish up all the controllers. So our next video, this was the board controller. I think our next video is going to, our next video is going to do the cache controller. So I'll see you then. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, please click on the like button below. If you wish to keep informed about new content, click on the subscribe button. And as always, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Again, thank you very much for watching. This is the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith. We'll see you later.